Good morning, Tim. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Um, what time is it where you are?
It's about 8:30 p.m. and we are in Bangalore,
Oh,
India.
okay. Well, I'm in Chicago. It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay. Good morning. Did you have your breakfast?
Yes, I did. I managed to get up early enough to get that taken care of.
Nice. I think it must be getting very cold there, so nice cuppa would have helped.
Yep, you're right.
A warm welcome, Tim, to our Story Zone book club event. Thanks for accepting the invitation. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm very pleased that you asked me.
Sure. I mean, when I looked at the Blackbird site and I saw your profile, I was quite impressed with the background that you have. A very exciting and colorful background, all the way from Chicago, from the forensic department with the Chicago Police Department to creative writing. And if I'm not mistaken, painting and teaching martial arts as well.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
uh, not to mention the books that you've written, and one of the reasons why we're connecting today. So, really honored to have someone with so much different types of talent, so many different types of talents amongst us, and thank you for accepting the invitation.
Gladly.
We'd just like to hear from you about your life experiences. Maybe help us a little bit about how things started, how your journey with books started, and back in as a child and then growing up, how did books and writing become a part of your life?
Sure.
So just over to you.
All right. Well, as a kid, I read a lot of comic books and a lot of detective stories. So the sort of detective stories that were published in pulp fiction back in the 1930s were being reprinted as paperback books when I was in high school. Authors like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and I love those. I was crazy about them, and so kind of thought that maybe that would be something that I would want to do either in real life or to write about. After high school, I moved from the Chicago area out to California and spent 10 years as just kind of a hippie vagabond bumming around, having experiences. I didn't go back to college until I was in my 30s. And I went for a degree in forensic science and then spent 5 years after that working for the police department in the crime laboratory. But since that time, I've had lots of other jobs, lots of other experiences. During the 10 years that I was out in California, I worked probably like 40 different jobs, just bumming around. Worked as a garbage man for a week, worked as a photographer on a newspaper, and I managed to get a little experience working for a private detective agency, which I thought would be like the fulfillment of my childhood dream, but it turned out the reality of being a detective was really different from fiction. So after I left the police department and decided that maybe writing would be a good thing to do, I went back to school again to learn how to write and got a master's degree in creative writing. And really, one thing that I think I've learned from that experience is that writing is a skill that has to be learned like anything else. I'm currently working on a variety of projects, one of which is an annual magazine that I publish. It's an arts and literature magazine called Litbop. And we get submissions from people all over the world, fiction, poetry, painting, photography. And a lot of people kind of skip the step of actually learning how to write. It seems like it should be easy. You have a story to tell, and you put it down on paper. But there's a lot to it. There are a lot of storytelling elements that people kind of need to learn. And having gone back to college to learn those things, I think was really important in my journey to learn how to write, to become an author. So that I've been asked by a lot of people, how do I get published? What do I do to get published? And I think that the main thing that people need to realize is that that step, the getting published part, is like the last thing you should be thinking about when you're writing. You got to learn how to work on character development, story structure, so that you have people interested in your characters and they want to keep reading to find out what's going to happen to them. Stuff like that.
What a eventful journey of your life, Tim. Thanks for sharing that with us. I'm quite intrigued by what you said earlier. You mentioned that you used to read a lot of these detective novels and some of this crime fiction as a youngster, and then obviously you felt like that you could take up writing as a career choice. But then life took a detour, and fortunately, after many years, you were able to come back and connect with it. So the person who first thought of writing or becoming an author versus the person who actually picked up the laptop or the pen and paper, I mean, what's the sort of progression in terms of mindset happened during those years?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think so in between the time that I worked at the crime lab and the time that I started writing, in addition to going back to school, I started reading again. Reading fiction, and that was really an important part of that transition. Finding authors that I admire, and trying to figure out what they were doing in their writing that appealed to me, that that kept me involved. I worked for a short period of time at a bookstore after I left the crime lab and went back to school. I needed, of course, to have some income coming in. Fortunately, I'm married to a really supportive woman who helped with the finances while I was in school. And as it turns out, she's also a forensic scientist. So when I'm writing a story now about something that happens that requires that kind of information, if I'm writing a detective story or a crime fiction story, I can go to her for somebody to look it over and make sure that my details are accurate. But
sure.
It was sort of trying to get back in touch with the love that I had of reading as a kid, and figuring out, well, how can I do that? How can I tell some of the stories that I think I have inside of me in a way that will engage other people? And I quickly realized that I didn't have the skills, and I had to learn how to do it. So,
Tim, sort of the years that you were in California, you mentioned that you were sort of doing this and that. You're trying to figure yourself out. Were books a part of that journey as well, or had that gotten partially interrupted at that time?
No, in fact, I call on that time period in my life often when I'm writing to get ideas for characters primarily, because I met a lot of people when I was traveling around, and that's essentially what I think good fiction is being able to introduce readers to interesting and unusual people that they might not have met in their own lives. And I met a bunch of them, and so I like to put them into my stories.
Has anyone come back and told you that they were able to identify themselves?
No, they haven't, and maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, maybe depending on what kind of characters you're building on top of them.
Right. Yeah, I don't want somebody to come up and say, "Hey, this villain in your novel sounds a lot like me, man."
This stint at the detective agency that you mentioned, and obviously in your novels you're writing crime fiction. I mean, obviously there is something, a tragedy or an incident that has happened, and you're trying to unravel that. And obviously, and also as a forensic scientist, I guess the job is similar, but obviously in a different way. And you're still unraveling that mystery. So which one is tougher according to you, the science part of it or the detecting part of it?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I'm not sure that I'm able to answer it well because um, so so the science part is really methodical and meticulous, and despite what people see on TV on shows like CSI and all of that, it's not glamorous at all. You're sitting there for hours and hours looking at a microscope and putting samples on instruments, and it really is the job of the forensic scientist is simply to associate a piece of evidence with an event.
Right.
You're not solving a crime. You're working for the science. So what you do could help the defense just as easily as it could help the prosecution. Um, the the work that I did at the detective agency didn't really have much to do with crime per se. For example, one of the reasons I stopped doing it was because they had a big business in following cheating spouses. And as far as I'm concerned, that's none of my business, So I wasn't really interested in that part of it. The best, I got to tell you, the best assignment that I had for the detective agency was guarding a summer camp for underprivileged children. It was up in the hills north of Los Angeles, and there were apparently like some bikers in the area who were harassing the kids and throwing bottles at them and stuff like that. So I would go up to the summer camp in the evenings around 4 PM, and then spend the whole night patrolling the grounds, trying to make sure the kids were safe. And I got to like sit around the campfire and roast marshmallows with them, and just guarding these kids out in the wilderness. It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't solving a crime. It wasn't detective work per se.
And when you took up writing and when you actually started creating these plots and trying to write these stories, it's kind of the opposite job of being a detective, right? And where you're actually creating all the red herrings and planting the evidence in a way that can be unraveled later on. So how does the journey in reverse gear work? I mean, did it come naturally because of experience, or you had to twist things up a little bit in your mind and get there?
Yeah, it was more imagination than reality, and I think that I mentioned Raymond Chandler, the detective fiction author from the 1930s, and I think that reading his work is what sort of helped me develop my own style. I don't really have like whodunits. What I have are books where you know what the crime is and you know who did it early on. And really the interesting part is watching my protagonist, who is a forensic scientist, try and figure it out. So, the reader already knows what's happened and who did it. They're not really mysteries per se. And the other thing I should mention about those books, the two novels I have in print, are that they take place in two different time periods. So part of them is historical fiction and part of them is crime fiction set in the present. And then those two plot lines sort of mesh together at the end to make a complete story.
Wow, that's very cool. Why don't you tell us a little bit, since you're on the topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about both the books and, I mean, maybe just an outline of the story or a snippet for the audience to know about?
Yeah. So the first one is called A Trace of Gold, and it takes place here in Chicago, both in the present and back in the gangster era here in Chicago, when people like the Ma Barker gang and Al Capone were bootlegging and robbing banks and stuff like that. So there is a guy whose father knew those old gangsters and is convinced that they've hidden some money someplace, and so he's going around pretty much kidnapping and torturing anybody who had anything to do with the Barker gang back in the 1930s to try and find out where the money is. And my protagonist, a forensic scientist named Sean McKinney, he is trying to prove that someone who was wrongly accused of that crime is innocent, and so that's how he gets involved with it.
Sure, sure, sure.
The second novel, Silence, takes place both here in Chicago and in New Orleans, and its historical component is right after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction era down south. And in that one, sort of similarly, someone is trying to get their hands on a painting that has been handed down through the ages from this young woman who grew up on a plantation, a sugar plantation, right after the Civil War. And so, once again, we have a historical component going on. The thing that connects both of those, in addition to my forensic scientist protagonist, Sean McKinney, is that the historical parts of those novels allowed me to do two things. One was to do a bunch of research, which I love. I love reading about history. And the second one was it enabled me to add sort of a little moral component. Like I don't get preachy in my work, but I always feel like if you have a point of view about something, that here's an opportunity to express it when you're writing. So the first one talks about income inequality in the United States, and then the second one talks a little bit about race relations. So kind of trying to incorporate something that is timely topic in a historical context.
To write a piece like that you've written, there are like now two kinds of research that you're doing. Obviously, one is the historical part of it, just making sure that you stay a little authentic while introducing elements of fiction, if at all. And then on the other side, there is this whole side of the forensic science, and that itself requires a lot of research. Like you said, that you're sometimes asking for input from your partner, and I think that, I mean, I'm just mind-boggled by the amount of research that is needed. So typically, how much time do you need to spend on researching the subject matter, and how do you go about developing the plot lines, and how much of history to add and how much of fiction to create around it? Just to help us understand your creative process there.
Sure. Well, let me back up a little bit and talk about like how the whole thing starts. So I usually wind up getting an idea when I'm off doing something else, riding around in the car, shopping, or taking a shower, or whatever, and then I jot it down and just start the writing right away to see if the idea is worth developing. If it is, then I'll make sort of a rough outline, and that'll give me an idea of what kind of research I need to do. If I say, okay, I'm going to set this in a certain time period or a certain city, then I really need to figure out how I'm going to do it and what kind of time is going to be involved. So, for example, the one that was set in New Orleans, we decided, okay, well, let's take a vacation to New Orleans and do some on the ground research, look around and have a good time while we're doing that. So it was a good excuse for a nice trip. The first one where I'm writing about the Barker Karpus gang from the 1930s, there are a couple of books that I found that were written by one of the members of the gang. That was helpful. The FBI has opened up their archives to the public, so you can actually go in and research the FBI's archives, and I found a lot of information there about the Barker Karpus gang. I find that one of the problems for me is that I can get really wrapped up doing the research and not doing the writing, because it's a lot of fun to do that kind of reading. So I have to, kind of be a little more disciplined and rein myself in.
Yeah, I think people who enjoy reading books, if they become authors, which a lot of them do turn into, then the balancing act of where to draw the line becomes a little blurry.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So while doing these research projects or this research reading, does it happen that you probably went in with a certain idea of what you wanted to research and create, but then during the course of research, you land up with another idea that is even more interesting or exciting and kind of changes the outline that you said that you lay in the beginning when you have a story outline or an idea in mind?
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, anybody who's ever done like online research, looking at databases or even just Googling information, once you get, all that feedback and you start looking through it, then yeah, there's something else and you think, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I should check this out. The next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by and you're off on a whole different idea.
So, and does your family know some of your quirks when you're in this zone of writing and researching? And how does that chemistry work?
Yeah, yeah. My wife is aware that sometimes my brain just isn't able to be reached. I'm off, doing something inside here that.
You mentioned somewhere in your bio that when you're not writing or reading, you're very happily painting pretty pictures and teaching martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us that part of your life and how did that come about?
Sure. So one of the things that that I did when I was wandering around California for 10 years was allow several beautiful women to break my heart. And at one point, when I was feeling particularly down, I was wandering around downtown Los Angeles, and it was a hot day, and I went into a movie theater, and the film Enter the Dragon, starring Bruce Lee, was playing. And I was mesmerized. I thought, this guy is amazing. This is great. I want to learn how to do this. So I started training. That was probably 1978, 79, something like that. And since then, I have continuously trained or taught various martial arts. I've had some great instructors. My main instructor is a man who moved here from China named Jianhuang Guo, and I got to say that I would not have been able to do any of the things that I've done in terms of going back to college, getting a job working for the police department, writing, any of that without having engaged in training in the martial arts. All that stuff taught me the value of discipline and hard work. Prior to that, I was just kind of, wandering around, having a good time, and not really thinking about how can I focus my attention, how can I focus my skills onto a goal. And martial arts did that for me. It helped me learn how to do homework, learn how to sit down at a table and do my math homework, learn how to schedule my time so that I could, write a book, all of that.
Impressive. So on one hand, we have maybe a dojo or something where you went and learned from your instructor, from your teacher, martial arts. And on the other hand, I also know that you've been teaching writing courses and other things at a college.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to know how the student Tim and the teacher Tim are sort of connected, and how does the thread of learning continue from the source to now this destination, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess except for writing, I would consider myself to be sort of officially retired now. I still teach martial arts classes, although these days I'm teaching Tai Chi Chuan to senior citizens. And the last full-time job that I had was teaching English at a community college here in Chicago, Malcolm X College. And my writing students there, basically what they got from me was the experience that I had learning from some of my best teachers. When I was in high school, I had an instructor who taught a class called Humanities, and he introduced us to different types of art and music and literature that we would previously, as kids, not have had any exposure to. And he did it in a way that it helped us to keep our interest. For example, one day I walked into the classroom and he said, "All right, everybody get up. We're going to walk around the school and we're going to feel textures." And we spent that whole period walking around the school, just touching things to feel different textures. Then we had to go back and write what we had experienced. What were those textures like? And one of the things that you find out when you're trying to write fiction and engage a reader is that the five senses are really important. So if you can express to somebody on the page what your characters are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, it's going to help put the reader into the experience. So I did that exact exercise with my students at Malcolm X College. I would have them walk around and touch things or smell things, and then they would have to try and describe on paper what it was that they were experiencing.
Wow.
And then my martial arts instructors, one of the things that you find out quickly is that the key to learning any physical exercise, whether it's baseball or Chinese Kung Fu, is repetition. You learn how to do it correctly, and then you just repeat that over and over again until it becomes muscle memory. The same thing is true with writing or painting. Once you develop a technique or a skill, you have to repeat it over and over again until it becomes a second nature, it becomes natural to you. So that's kind of the boring part of learning, I guess. But I think it's an important thing. I think it's an important thing for people to understand. And my students at Malcolm X College, maybe that was like their least favorite part of my classes, but I think it helped them.
I'm guessing in a nutshell, the feedback or the recommendation from your side to budding writers is to learn and to try to master how to express these five senses experienced by the characters in the book, and practice it over and over again till it becomes naturally habitual for them.
Yeah, and I think that I think I could break advice to budding writers down into sort of three sections. The first one is, you always hear people say, "Write what you know," and I think that gets misinterpreted a lot. So I don't think that write what you know means that if you want to write about a doctor, a surgeon, that you have to have been a doctor. I think what it means is, I mean, you can research anything and find out, the bits and pieces that you need to try and make your characters become those people. But write what you know really means being able to dig deep inside and get in touch with your feelings and be honest about putting those feelings down on paper. If you're reading a book and you get the sense that the author has manufactured some feelings, that they're not being honest with the reader, it really sours you. You think, well, this person is just using literary trickery, writing flowery poetic phrases to try and draw me in, but I don't feel like there's any honesty in the writing. So write what you know means have experiences, have feelings, get in touch with those, and learn how to put those down on paper. The second component then is learning the skill, learning the stuff that you just talked about, how to set a scene using our five senses, how to tell a story using structure that keeps ramping up the interest and the excitement till you reach a crescendo point where everything sort of comes together. And then the third component, I think, is the publishing part. The world of publishing is changing all the time. And so my first novel, A Trace of Gold, was originally published traditionally with a local press here in Chicago. that company went out of business, I bought the rights back, and now I self-publish my work. But there are sort of two ways that authors can look at what they want to do with their finished product now. One is to try and go a traditional route, which means that you need to get an agent. It's a long, difficult process, and there are tons of books and tons of information out there about that. The other one is self-publishing, and that's like a minefield right now, because there are a lot of companies out there who have figured out that they can make money off of people who want to be published authors. So you kind of have to be careful and make sure that you're not being taken advantage of. One of the women who is part of this group that I'm in, the Blackbird Writers, where you found us, her name is Valerie Beal, and she has a website that has information for budding authors, and she can, through her website, help people sort of navigate the dangers of self-publishing. Sort of let you know, you don't have to give somebody $10,000 to publish your book for you, because they can't get it in a bookstore. Only you can get it in a bookstore. And selling books through bookstores has almost become the sole province of the big five major publishing companies. People who are self-published generally wind up selling most of their work online or by themselves to their local bookstores. So a lot of information about that out there too.
So I think coming back to the day probably when your first book came out and it got published, and days since then, what are some of the highlights in terms of feedback you've received, or maybe someone's come up to you and said something about the book, maybe in your family or outside? Would you share some of those experiences with us?
Yeah, so a couple of them that really stick in my mind. I've had 2 or 3 authors that I really respect, whose writing I admire, come up to me and say that they really enjoyed reading my work, and that's great. When somebody who you think is a good writer appreciates your own writing, that's really a big boost. And I'm in a writers group with a number of them right now. One of them is an author named Libby Hellman, who is a great crime fiction writer. I also got some really nice reviews in the trades for my first book, A Trace of Gold, which was published initially under a different name. The review for that from Mystery Scene magazine, the woman who wrote that review compared my writing to John Steinbeck, who is one of our brilliant classic authors. Guy who wrote Of Mice and Men, Grapes of Wrath. I was knocked out. I was stunned. That was the highest compliment that my writing has ever gotten. It was wonderful.
I would print that out and frame it and keep it in my room, I think, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as my friends and family go, they've all been very supportive of my writing, but I'm not sure that any of them have actually ever read my books. So if any of them see this is a shout out. You need to sit down and read my stuff.
Tim, do you have the same sense of humor that we're noticing today also reflecting in your books?
I hope so.
Do you have any news about what you're writing next, and what can we expect to see?
Yeah, so I have 3 projects I'm currently working on. I'm sorry, I have 4 projects I'm currently working on. One is a television pilot that I'm writing with my wife. It was her idea, and she plotted it. Now I'm doing the writing, putting in the dialogue. I have a novel that is a finished first draft. It's a standalone. It's not one of the novels about my forensic scientist, McKinney. Okay. And I expect to have that finished probably the middle of next year, the middle of 2024. And then I have an anthology that I'm editing and putting together for the Blackbird writers. We have these anthologies of short stories that we put out, and the one that's going to be up next year is called Provoked. It'll have short stories by a bunch of the Blackbird writers. And then I think I mentioned earlier, I edit a arts and literary magazine called Litbop, and that should be out at the beginning of the year. So
okay.
All that stuff, I should have information about all that stuff up sometime in the next month or two on my website. And I'll tell you the name of that. You can get to it either from thrillingtales.com, all one word, or litbop.com. Litbop is Litbop.
Litbop. Okay, cool. And the authors who are participating in these, especially the anthology and the Litbop, are these all writers who write about crime fiction, or there are different genres of stories?
The Blackbird Writers one will all be crime fiction. Litbop is more literary fiction, although this particular issue, there are a lot of supernatural stories in it. We get submissions from all over the world, and for some reason, almost all the really good submissions we got had either some supernatural element or some element of horror or something like that. I didn't plan it that way, but the last issue was more family drama stuff. So, you know.
Interesting. Maybe I'll participate in the next one.
Please do. I would love that. I would love that, Puneet. Send me something. That'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. I conclude the episode very inspired and happy, and thank you for making that happen, Tim. So, I think that's for today, and it's been a real honor having you here, and talking to you and hearing your stories has been the highlight of my day. So thank you for that, and good luck with our future books, and I hope to see you the TV series sometime soon on Netflix.
Yeah, I hope so too. All right, take care, Puneet. It was great to talk to you.
Sure. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, Tim. Good night. Bye.